Many thanks for joining us on One Slot today on News Central TV. My name is Rita Omodia. Now, on today's One Slot, the coronation of King Charles III came with a lot of mixed reactions. Some good, some bad, and for many, a recollection of the historical atrocities committed by the British monarchy. During wars and through exploration, slavery, colonization, many of Africa's greatest treasures were taken off the continent's shores and shipped to Europe. While some have been returned to their abode, others remain trapped in British museums or locked away in the hidden chambers with other British monarchical treasures to be displayed on special occasions like the coronation. Since the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Britain's longest reigning monarch, there have been renewed calls for the return of stolen artifacts. The calls have been loudest in South Africa, with the coronation of King Charles III asking the royal family to return the Great Star of Africa. Now, the Great Star of Africa, or Cullinan diamond, is cut from a larger gem that was mined in South Africa in 1905 and handed over to the British royal family by South Africa's colonial authorities. The Star of Africa is set in the royal scepter that King Charles III held at his coronation on Saturday. The Star of Africa, along with so many artifacts such as Magdala treasures, Zimbabwe birds, Bangor Queen, Rosetta Stone, are considered looted from Africa and should be returned back to their home countries. Presently, a petition calling for Britain to return the diamond set in the royal scepter is gaining ground globally. This will be our focus on today's One Slot. Stay tuned to One Slot for more on this conversation. Now, joining me on this episode, we have Vuyolwethu Zungula, a member of parliament in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much for joining me on One Slot.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Now, to start with, first of all, we've seen these growing petitions, especially from South Africa, calling for the return of the Cullinan, that is the Star of Africa diamond. So can you tell us more about this Star of Africa diamond that has been so much talked about since the death of Queen Elizabeth II and presently with the coronation of King Charles III?
Look, what is true is that Britain raped, killed, murdered our people in order for them to have the riches and the diamonds and the gold they are flaunting around whenever they are having these kind of events. It is true that all of those artifacts that are there that came from the African continent were not donated in good faith to them. Rather, it was artifacts, it was golds, it was diamonds that came through the spilling of blood of innocent people whose only crime was that they were born in Africa. So it is our view as the ATM that all of that needs to be corrected, because there can never be peace without justice. It is in that regard whereby we want justice, because it can't be that people who have proceeds of crime are going to flaunt those proceeds and they're going to expect that the world is going to not forget what those proceeds were ill-gotten as a result of crime. So if you talk about even this diamond, people say that it was a donation to the British, but it was a donation from an illegitimate and colonial leaders who were white and wanted to appease the British. The native citizens of this country died for those minerals to be given to those to the British.
And while you're looking at all of this, because you're talking about donations and the gift to the British monarchy, for the Cullinan diamond, what exactly does it represent to Africa or South Africans especially?
Look, South Africans, after 1994, you'll recall that one of the first things the new government did was to rejoin the Commonwealth, a Commonwealth which is basically an association of all of the former colonies of Britain. Whereas the apartheid government, one of the first things they did when they took power was to leave the Commonwealth. So one of the biggest problems that we face currently as Africans is that we've got leaders who occupy leadership positions who are not fighting for justice on behalf of their people. Rather, they want to remain friends with people that have caused harm and pain to majority of our citizens. So there needs to be a change in the mindset, and we, the citizens, must agitate for that change so that our leaders can be our mouthpiece, not leaders who are going to suppress our feelings simply because they want to be in good, in good friendship with our colonizers.
And for the African government, you talk about this lackadaisical attitude and the fact that there should be a general fight for the collection of all the stolen artifacts. Now, South Africa is one part, but we also have other artifacts that have been considered looted from Africa. How would you rate African governments' judicial use of their power to try to get the stolen artifacts back generally?
Yes, indeed, that is the weakness, because if you look at the institutions in our countries, whether it is a judiciary, it is executive, it is parliament, it does not take any tangible steps for justice to be done. Hence, you find that talks like such as these ones that we're having now remain a discussion, a political discussion, whereas there is no resolution, for example, that is taken by parliament in some of these countries to say this is a resolution and the executive of the country is mandated to effect that resolution. So what we believe should happen is that there needs to be, more impactful way of driving justice. Because if you check how the colonizers actually killed and installed themselves as our rulers, is that they use the law, whereas we are just using politics, whereby we're just politicking and not transforming or utilizing the law as a means of implementing our political ideas. So we are in agreement to say there must be, an enforcement of our political ideas via the law, meaning via institutions such as parliament and the judiciary, to make sure there's justice in this regard.
Now, the last time I checked the petition, which has been raised by so many people, about 10,000 people have signed the petition calling for the Star of Diamond to be returned back to South Africa. You're a member of parliament, and from what I saw late, we've not seen any response from the South African government concerning this. So is the South African government alienating itself from this? And are there plans to have discussions on these stolen artifacts being brought back to Africa or South Africa?
Indeed, the root causes of our problems is leadership that wants to be good friends with our former colonizers. You'll recall that even some of the leaders, they've got houses in Britain, in Europe, whenever they're just temporarily in Africa serving their time as presidents. Most of the time they are spending their time in Europe. In South Africa, all of the presidents after 1994, one of the first things they do after being elected as presidents, they go to Britain. So which shows that the biggest problem, it is not the people, because the people express these views. However, it is the government that ought to be a representative of the people that has now become a representative of our former colonial masters. Because it is this government, for example, in South Africa, there was a portrait of the former Queen of England, the one who just passed on, in Parliament. And this is an institution or a monarch that has led to killing of our kings and our traditional leaders in our country. But to have a portrait of her in our parliament, whereby we don't have a portrait of African leaders in our parliament, clearly shows that some of these institutions, they are no longer servants of the people. Rather, they have become extensions of our former colonizers.
Now, Vuyo, I want to get more clarity on this. Has there been any response from the South African government concerning this particular issue? Has there been any response?
No, there's no response whatsoever.
Okay, now, while we're looking at the government side of all of this, let's look at the British monarchy. I mean, this is not the first time that they've been calling for this stolen artifacts to be brought back to Africa, but somehow it seems like it's fallen on deaf ears. We've seen France, we've seen other monarchies try to return these artifacts, but for the British institution, we've seen nothing like that. So what exactly is responsible for this?
Look, whenever any caring government, any listening government, whenever, for example, there's a petition that has been signed by millions of people, and you have this voice that has been coming up from ordinary South African citizens, a listening government ought to implement the views of the people. So that is why I want to stress the point that instead of having a government of the people, we in South Africa, in some of the African states, we've got governments of the colonial of the former colonial powers, governments that actually suppress the rights and the wishes of the people and rather implement the wishes of the colonial masters. So the people that are responsible, it is a government. However, because the government has been captured, because the government in its orientation, it is not a government of the people anymore. That is why we are having these problems whereby issues are raised. People want back their minerals, but the government does not even go to the UN to say, this is what should be done in order to restore justice.
Now, while there's still petitions, some people are asking questions, and it's saying, South Africa is facing a whole lot of things, talking about load shedding, talking about the political climate in South Africa, and right now you have the petition for this artifact. How does it actually fit into the broader aspect? Because some people say, why not face the present situations we have in South Africa rather than chasing the shadows of the past? Are you also of this opinion?
Never. We'll never be part of that thinking that fighting for justice is just playing around or chasing shadows of the past, because the mere reason why in South Africa we've got the highest inequality levels, the highest unemployment, highest crime rates, it is as a result of the colonial and apartheid times. If you look at the state of the country, there's one part of the country that appeases and that appeals to the white minority, and there's the other part of the country that is a reality for Black people. And that is as a result of what the colonial governments and the apartheid governments did to us. So when we are fighting for these things, it is not just a tick box, an exercise whereby we're just ticking a box, but rather it is about restoring justice and making sure that even the current minerals that are mined now, our coal, you'll check that even on a daily basis, there are tons of coal that leave our shores going to Europe, meaning that exploitation that happened in the past is still happening now. So when we are fighting for the wrongs of the past, we are also fighting for the wrongs of the current, so that people in South Africa get to live quality lives and not to be subjected to poor quality of life because of the exploitation of Europe.
Looking at South Africa also, Vuyo, we've seen situations of theft in the museums, and, the Western world is saying this is a better way to keep these artifacts for the world. And with Africa's tradition, keeping of history or preservation of sites, we've seen that governments have failed to do that. So if eventually these artifacts are brought back to South Africa or to Africa, do you see a problem of preservation or maintenance of these artifacts? Or don't you believe that these artifacts will once again be lost?
Look, firstly, those artifacts, those golds, those diamonds, they belong to Africa, they belong to South Africa. Therefore, we cannot be negotiating with thieves. We cannot be negotiating with people who killed our ancestors for those artifacts, to take those artifacts. So they cannot just want to say they are going to keep them, whereas those artifacts, by them having those artifacts, it is a result of thieving. It is a result of the murder and the spilling of blood of our citizens. Secondly, we've got so many museums in our countries whereby these museums are doing an excellent job, whereas they've been preserving our artifacts in a manner that is actually pleasing. Therefore, we can't be listening to thieves. We can't be listening to people that have benefited as a result of the murdering of our people, want to dictate to us, the original people who own or who should own these minerals, as to what we should do. We are fine with those minerals being in South Africa. They must be fine with their own minerals being in their own country.
And what has the South African government done to ensure that these sites or these artifacts are protected? Because we saw reports of thieves actually stealing from the museum. What has the South African government done to make sure that these or such a thing does not occur?
Look, the first thing that the South African government should have done was to engage the British monarch and the British government to express the views of the South African citizens and fight for justice, failing which, approach international organizations such as the UN or the ICC. And if you look at how the departments, particularly of arts and culture, have been doing a very good job in our countries when it comes to the preservation of our history and the teaching of our children as to where we come from, what was stolen from us. So we've got no doubt that our institutions are worthy enough, our institutions are capable enough to actually take care of all of the gold and the diamonds on all of the artifacts that were stolen from us.
All right, thank you so much, Vuyolwethu. We'll take a quick breather now. We're still having discussions on this bring back stolen artifacts from Europe. When we come back from this break, we'll be having joining us for this conversation Muthusi Kamanga, who is a lawyer and activist. He'll be joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Do stay with us on Onslaught.